Happy Wednesday and welcome back to the Locked On Red Sox podcast. Thank you so much for everybody making Locked On Red Sox your first listen every single day. I am your host, Massachusetts Pirates team insider Jake Ignaszewski. I'm also here with my co-host, NESN writer Lauren Campbell. And in this episode, Lauren and I are going to sort of break down sort of the craziness that has been going on so far now that baseball is finally back, as well as breaking down some of the new signings that the Red Sox have made to bolster up their bullpen and talk a little bit about how we potentially see the Red Sox using those guys during the 2022 season.
You are Locked On Red Sox, your daily Boston Red Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So we are back, and as I mentioned last episode, baseball is finally back. And I don't know about you, Lauren, but it's been so much fun having Red Sox Twitter back in full swing and just Red Sox Nation sort of back in full swing and being able to see everything that's been going on so far in spring training.
Yeah, it's definitely been fun. And especially for me, being able to write about the Red Sox and write about their press conferences and seeing them all over social media again and being together, because during the lockout, they couldn't talk to, the teams couldn't really communicate with their higher ups or anything. So it was really tough for them to just kind of exist without some of their best friends. So to see them together again has been super fun and wholesome. And it makes my day go by much faster because now I've got a lot of baseball to write about.
Right, and especially all the craziness that has been going on so far in this free agency. And I don't know about yourself, but when I saw that the deadline, or at least the time period of when they were going to sign the CBA, was 6 p.m., I actually was at work and I had my friend take my phone. I said, when it hits 6 p.m. Eastern time, I want you to start scrolling through Twitter, because I was in the middle of something, and I said, I want you to let me know the deals that are happening. Because like myself, like, and everybody else, I believe, like, thought once it hit that deadline was over and the lockout was lifted, that deals was going to start flooding through, because most people expected that there was some behind the scenes conversations going on. And Chaim Bloom in his recent press conference sort of mentioned that, we at least for us, there wasn't background conversations going on. We needed to take that time to, catch up with our guys, especially like a guy like Jackie Bradley Jr., who literally got traded to his former team in the last second. They haven't been able to talk to him in 3 months.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about I know it's been a little slower with the trades and everything. We thought maybe Carlos Correa would go right away, Trevor Story would go right away. We thought like all of these players, these bigger name players, would get signed to these massive deals at 601. But it hasn't been that way, and the Red Sox have been moving kind of slow. And so, Carlos Correa is still out there, Freddie Freeman's still out there, but as you mentioned, the Red Sox got that trade in the last second, and JBJ was at Mookie's wedding, and Mookie didn't allow cell phones at his wedding, which is such a power move. I want to implement that at my wedding, but there was a designated area for it to use your phone, so he went out to call his wife to check in on the kids because his wife had just had another baby. And he hung up the phone and he gets a call 2 minutes later, and he said it was Chaim, and he's like, "You're coming back to the Red Sox." And he went in and saw JD Martinez. He's like, hey teammate, what's going on? And then it was midnight and the lockout happened. So I think that's been like my favorite story to come from the lockout, just because it's so wholesome and it's very it's very JBJ. I just feel like that absolutely would happen to somebody like him. And to be celebrating with Mookie and JD, and I'm sure there were plenty of other Red Sox there and former Red Sox there. So that's probably been the best story from the lockout thus far, especially when it comes to the Red Sox, because they haven't done a whole lot yet.
I couldn't agree more. I saw that. I was, the first thing that came to my eyes, I'm surprised that this didn't come out sooner. But I mean, as we all know, personnel haven't been able to talk to players. Major league players haven't been able to speak on stuff, at least players that are on the 40-man roster. So I completely agree that that's definitely a very wholesome take, as well as, it's cool seeing old faces like him back in a Red Sox uniform. And it's definitely been tough, hoping and praying that the Red Sox would immediately do things right out of the lockout. But, they've definitely been sort of what Jared Carrabis always says, interest kings. They're interested in everybody. And something came out today, especially after the Atlanta Braves traded for Matt Olson yesterday from the Oakland A's, that the Red Sox are now in the sweepstakes for first baseman Freddie Freeman.
Yeah, I think it doesn't go far beyond interest. I think that the Red Sox are very set at first for a long time. And I think that bringing in someone like Freddie Freeman, though I love the idea of him being here, you're not going to give a guy in his 30s a longer term contract. Maybe he wants to continue playing first base. Maybe he's only looking to DH. Maybe he wants to platoon. I mean, there is versatility there for him for sure, and he's going to have a big market definitely. But he just doesn't make sense for the Red Sox. And even though Chaim Bloom has yet to make a really, really big splash since coming to the Red Sox, obviously Freddie Freeman would be a hell of a one to start that kind of trend, hopefully. But I just don't think he makes a lot of sense. I think that you have a good thing in Bobby Dahlbeck right now. You have to really see what you have with him, and you don't want to bring somebody in and destroy his confidence. But I mean, Freddie Freeman, of course, I want him. I would love to have him in a Red Sox uniform. There's no denying that at all. I just think it's not going to go. I mean, we see this every year. The Red Sox are interested in this person. The Red Sox showed interest. The Red Sox are taking or making calls about player X. It happens every single year. So I'd be very, very, very surprised. My jaw would be on the floor. And like I texted you earlier, like if Chaim Bloom did pull that off, statue right outside Fenway Park.
And especially the teams that they're bidding up against, like the Dodgers, the Yankees. I mean, you throw the Rays in there and you're like, yeah, I don't really think that they're going to give them a lot of money. But, you could potentially see a team like the Dodgers throw, 35, 40 million at him for like a short-term deal. And he might bite at it. Same with the Yankees. They need a first baseman. It's interesting to see what they'll do with Luke Voigt. But, they're definitely on the trade wheel right now, especially after the recent move that they made. But when I looked at this, I saw this more as a publicity thing for the Red Sox to make to try and drive up the price. Because when you look at it, the Blue Jays, the Rays, and the Yankees, three other teams in the AL East that are in on this guy, I feel like that they're trying to drive up the price for those teams. And ultimately, it is going to be interesting where he does land. But obviously, this is a Red Sox podcast. But I'm curious, when you saw the news about Matt Olson, my jaw dropped. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I was shocked. I knew that there was a slim chance of Freddie Freeman returning to Atlanta with everything, all the rumors and everything. So I was like, okay, maybe until Matt Olson news broke, I was like, there's still that chance that he can return to Atlanta. He's been there for so long. Like he's going to be in a Braves uniform for the rest of his career. And they traded for Matt Olson. I was like, okay, that essentially closes the door, but the NL has the DH. Maybe he wants to DH. And then they signed Olson today to that massive extension. And I was like, okay, that just slammed the door, locked it, boarded it up, deadbolt, everything. So I was like, I hope it was at least a friendly kind of split, because I know that, was it 12 years he spent in Atlanta and won a World Series with them. And it was somebody who I thought would be with the Braves forever. So, definitely shocked, but also the Braves still get a really, really good player in Matt Olson.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I don't want to go on this subject too much longer in terms of talking about the Braves on a Red Sox podcast. But he was with that team throughout their rebuild. That's how I look at it. And I couldn't believe it, especially like you mentioned with the 8-year, I think it was $168 million that Matt Olson got today. But I mean, especially in terms of, the interest that the Red Sox have been putting on different guys. It has been interesting to see some of the guys that they have more focused on. Chaim Bloom did mention, we're going to focus on a right-handed bat. We're also going to focus on bolstering the bullpen. But it was interesting in his recent press conference, there's a lot of questions on, are you going to make a big splash this year, especially with the luxury tax in the CBT now much higher. I believe it's $20 million more than it was before the lockout, as well as all the money that is coming off of the books after 2022. He pretty much said, I don't really like to look at things in Chaim Bloom's great way of answering a question, but not actually answering a question. He mentioned, I don't like to look at things in terms of like how much of a splash this is going to be. I more look at it as how is this going to help the team down the line now and in the future. And it was also interesting as well when he was talking about, are you looking for a right-handed outfielder? Or are you looking to bolster the outfield? He goes, well, and it was funny because he stumbled on his injury. He's like, he's like, well, actually, I'm more looking just for a right-handed bat and not particularly. I'm just looking for a position player. And then one of the reporters made a great point. Well, so you're pretty much saying that you might sign a guy like you did with Kike Hernandez, who can play second base, but he's actually might play outfield. And we'll see what's actually going to happen, but you never know what's going to happen with Chaim Bloom.
No, you don't. And I think that, the Red Sox still are in decent position. The AL East is always a very tough division. They're always stacked. There's plenty of holes in their lineup and in their bullpen that definitely need to be addressed. And we've seen it before. I mean, he brought in Kyle Schwarber at the trade deadline last year where it was kind of like there wasn't really a need for him. Like he wasn't a needed asset.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, he was one of the most important players to get you into the postseason and in the postseason as well. So it's the smaller moves like that and like the Kike Hernandez move. And that's the most money he's spent since he's been with the Red Sox, and it's $14 million. So I think a big splash eventually will come, whether that's this season or next season. But they are setting up their farm system to be really successful. Like the prospects are very, very good. The team itself is still overall pretty good, but there definitely needs to be moves made with the Yankees making trades, the Blue Jays just continuing to look like a very, very legitimate AL East contender. And the Rays are always going to be around. Sorry, Orioles, but one day they'll be in the conversation with us. But the Red Sox right now, I think there's a reason that odds makers have them finishing fourth in the AL East right now.
Yeah, very true. And, even though with Chaim Bloom and Alex Cora doing press conferences and answering a little bit of the questions that we've talked about, especially during this offseason, there's still a lot of question marks, and that's why you're listening to this podcast, and we're going to have the answer for you throughout, the remainder of this offseason and this spring training. And, we got a lot of exciting topics that we've been sort of chefing up, and a lot of exciting guests that we're planning on having on as well. So if you have not yet, make sure you subscribe either on YouTube or on whatever audio platform that you're listening to. But in this next second of Logged On Red Sox, we're going to be breaking down the two relievers that the Red Sox signed this past week and giving a little bit of our thoughts on those signings and where we could see those guys potentially playing in the 2022 season. But before we get to the second segment, I just want to take a second to talk to you about Mission Possible. So are you ready to discover your purpose and leave an impact wherever you go? Mission Possible, written and read by New York Times bestselling author and athlete, former minor league baseball player Tim Tebow, encourages you to find your inspiration, pursue your purpose, and create a life for yourself that counts. Ignite a new spark in your life through this new inspirational listen. Mission Possible by Tim Tebow is available everywhere audiobooks are sold. And as I mentioned, thank you so much for making Locked On Red Sox your first listen every single day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB Prospects, hosted by Lindsey Crosby, is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. So as I mentioned in segment 2, Lauren and I are going to be talking about the relievers that the Red Sox recently signed. And we can start off with Matt Strahm, former reliever for the San Diego Padres, coming off of a season where he only pitched 6 innings and he unfortunately had a shortened season due to a knee injury in surgery, but what was your thoughts when you first saw this signing of Matt Strahm?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think that, with the knee injury there's reason for concern. I mean, it's never, I don't want to say not a good sign when somebody has an injury, especially with the knee. Knee injuries are very tricky, and it can become very difficult to really put trust in that leg again. But, I think that he'll be a good depth piece. I think that it's a great deal, 1 year, $3 million. And he's really, really intriguing because he didn't really have the best 2021 season. He only had 6 appearances and he was primarily used as a reliever, which as I just said in the first segment, the Red Sox have a lot of holes in their bullpen. But he did really just have a good season in 2020 when he was with the Padres. That was his most consistent time when he was a very consistent pitcher. So he's not too far removed from that. So I think if his knee completely heals and he's trusting in it and he can kind of return to that, that's going to be a good pitcher to have. He appeared in 19 games in 2020 and he pitched just over 20 innings. It was 20 and 2/3, and he allowed 6 earned runs and only 14 hits. And I know 2020 was the shortened season, whatever, but if he can return to that form and continue to do that, the Red Sox may have just absolutely stolen this guy.
Especially for only $3 million. Like we know how Chaim Bloom is a little bit of a penny pincher, but he's not going to overvalue a guy. Maybe he did. There's one guy he might have overvalued in Michael Wacha, but we'll see this season. But look, yeah, as you mentioned, Strahm, if he can get back to that 2020 form as well, when you saw what he did in 2018, I understand that's 3 years ago, but sometimes guys can get back to that form. He had a 2.05 ERA, over 40 appearances in 2018. As you mentioned, 2020, 2.61 ERA. And I could really see him potentially being that seventh inning guy. But one thing that we've talked about, not only throughout this offseason, but ever since I've started on this podcast, is how unreliable the bullpen was last season, and they need to fix that. And I think Chaim Bloom is laser focused on making that a priority this offseason.
It's so weird because last season when the bullpen was on, it was on. Like there were times when it looked like it was not an issue in the season. And then things just started to unfold. And we saw that with Matt Barnes, and we were hoping Ryan Brazier's return was going to be a positive one. And he just could never really get back on track. And things just started to kind of unwind. So I think that, starting to do like lower risk, higher reward kind of moves are going to be beneficial. And also on a 1-year deal, it's not the end of the world. So hopefully that these two pitchers can kind of bolster that and provide a little boost to the bullpen that it very, very much needs.
Very true. And, looking at his pitch sequence, fastball 93, slider 88, changeup 86, curveball 83. So he's got a lot of different pitches that, he can get guys on swinging and misses. We usually see relievers only have a 3-pitch sort of repertoire, but he's pretty versatile in terms of his pitches. And then when we look at, Jake Diekman, 2 years, $8 million, another guy, only $4 million. And, it's been interesting hearing people talk about, the relievers that are currently on the market. And, in my mindset, as long as they don't spend freaking over $7 to $8 million for a guy, I'm fine with it, because, you're looking for those guys to be your number one, to be your closer. And we've seen guys like Kenley Jansen get like $12 to $15 million. Like, that's nuts for me as a reliever.
Yeah, and I think with Diekman, it's another low risk, high reward. It means 2-year, $8 million, and he'll get $3.5 million in 2022 and in 2023, and with the $4 million option for 2024. So it's a pretty good deal. And he was one of the best bullpen arms available. Even though he's 35, he was still really, really good for the A's in 2020. I know that I'm like stuck on this pandemic season, but when you pitch in 21 games and you have a .42 ERA, you're doing something right. Like, yes, that is a small sample size. Yes, there was only 60 games in 2020, but he was still really, really good. And to another lefty, so that's good. Another lefty out of the bullpen. He's been in the league 10 years. I feel good about these two signings. I think that, like we said in the first segment, they're not these big flashy names. They're not going to garner people to be like, oh, hell yeah, like this was the best signing ever. But it's going to catch your attention, and it's going to kind of be like, oh, why would Chaim Bloom kind of sign these guys? And then he looks like a genius when they become well utilized. Hopefully they don't get overused. Like we've seen plenty of relievers get overused the last few seasons. But these two pitchers have the potential to really do damage out of this bullpen and just kind of bring it back to life, and maybe even set up Matt Barnes and kind of get him rolling again and get him on the right track. So there's definitely a lot of upside to both of these guys. I think the upside outweighs the downside, and I think fans should be excited for the both of them.
Very true, and that's going to be Matt Barnes is going to be a subject that we're going to talk about in the next few days or so. But he talked a little bit about what didn't go great last season, and he's going to need that support around him from veterans like Diekman as well as Strahm, of guys who have gone through those tough stretches and are able to help him be able to overcome some of those mental struggles that he's had during the second half. But when you look at Diekman, pitching in 67 games last season with a 3.86 ERA. Overall, has over 10 years, has a 3.73 ERA over his time in the major leagues. But, as you mentioned, very reliable guy. I think that's what the Red Sox need. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Alex Cora really maneuvers around this bullpen. We got a little bit more clarity on that with his press conference, him mentioning how he's going to, potentially use Houck and Whitlock. But the one thing that I'm really curious about is how they're going to build up this bullpen even more. I don't think that this is it. Obviously, we saw Adam Ottavino sign with the Mets a few days ago, so he's definitely not coming back. But I think that Heimblum and the Red Sox are far from done from building up this bullpen.
Yeah, I think so too. And I know that Cora said that they want to stretch Houck and Whitlock to go longer innings. I don't think Houck will really have a problem with that. It's more so getting through that rotation for the third time. But I'm really interested to see how much they stretch these guys out. Do you want to use them as 4 or 5 inning guys? Do you want to use them as longer relievers, spot starters? So I'm interested to see the approach they take with them. Obviously, I've been an advocate of Garrett Whitlock being the closer of this team, but if he can be a longer setup guy, or say Evaldi or Chris Sale, Nick Pivetta, one of them is bound to have a bad outing where they just get shelled and they go only 2 2/3 innings. You're going to need a guy to eat up a couple 4 or 5 innings. So they could play a very, very crucial role in this bullpen.
Very true. It's going to be really interesting how everything really all plays out. As we mentioned in the first segment, you never really know how the dominoes are going to fall when Heim is in the driver's seat. And luckily, I think I believe that they're starting spring training very, very soon. They're starting to play games very, very soon. So
Thursday, yep.
I'm very excited about that, to finally see baseball and stop having to watch college baseball. As great as it is, it'll be nice to watch Red Sox baseball again. But going into our third and final segment of this episode, we're going to finish it off with a little mental health minute, as well as giving you guys a little bit of an update of what you can look forward to for the remainder of this week, as well as a little bit of a sneak peek of what you could see during the following week as well. So I just want to take a second to talk to you about Rock Auto. With the ever increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless and seemingly intimidating questioning, like, is your Odyssey an LX or an EX? Like, I don't even know who knows that. And while waiting, for the person behind the counter to order the parts on their computer and choosing the only brand that their warehouse happens to carry, you have a computer with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. So save time and money when using Rock Auto. And why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump is $353 from a chain store and $216 from Rock Auto. Rock Auto is also reliably low prices for every single customer. So go to rockauto.com right now and get all the parts available for your car or truck, right, logged on in their "How did you hear about us" box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So now going into our third and final segment, I just wanted to take this time to have a little bit of a mental health minute, especially with everything that is going on currently. Baseball coming back. A lot of people are, I bet, definitely busy, especially with the warm weather starting to come back and everything like that. And I just wanted to stress the importance of self-care time. You might be nervous that you might be letting people down, either at work or family, by taking time to yourself. No. People need to understand that you need that time for yourself, and being able to just spend a day to grab a pizza, grab some ice cream, and just love yourself for a day, that's super duper needed.
Yeah, and I think something that I've really tried to implement in my life and in my schedule, and I definitely need to do a better job at it, is putting non-negotiables in my schedule. So like take an hour or two from my day, and that's I can do whatever I want. It's if that means I'm going to go to the gym, that's when I'm going to the gym. But I'm if someone's like, "Oh, hey, can you do this for me or can you stay late at work?" No. Like that is my non-negotiable time out of my schedule. And there are days I really do stick to it. But there's other days where I need to continue to enforce that boundary because it's going to help me with my work life balance and just kind of keep me level headed and grounded. Because if I don't, I'm going to be working from 8 to 4, and then I'm not going to go to the gym, and then I'm going to be ordering McDonald's for dinner every single night. And I need to just continue to enforce that boundary because when you have the boundaries, you just have a better balance in your life and you don't feel bad about putting yourself first. Because if you're not giving the best version of yourself to your friends, your family, work, your relationships, then it's not fair to you and it's not fair to the other people, but it's especially not fair to you.
Very true. And, I think sometimes it's so tough for people to use that word no because you want to please people. You don't want to let people down. You want to meet people's expectations. And, I think that's definitely super duper important, especially in terms of when you're doing it to help your mental health. As we've talked about, we've stressed this on this podcast a lot. Mental health is the same thing as physical health. And, at times you need to put that first. And I think that's a good way to end this episode off. But definitely look out for episodes this week. We're going to be having on associate producer for Zolak and Bertrand show of 98.5 The Sports Hub, Tyler Milliken, on this week, as well as we're going to be touching on a little bit and diving into Alex Cora's comments about how he's going to utilize Tanner Houck as well as Garrett Whitlock, and a little bit on the Matt Barnes situation. Is he going to be a closer? How are the Red Sox going to use him? And sort of diving into what he mentioned in his press conference a little bit more on what did not work out during his second half of last season and what he's doing this spring training to make sure that that does not happen again. But as I mentioned, greatly appreciate everybody making Locked On Red Sox your first listen every single day. Now make your second listen Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan, please call him Sully, brings you his unique perspective on Major League's past and present, it's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And something else that's free is following Locked On Red Sox on Twitter. So go over right now. It's LO_Red Sox. We're going to be posting daily Red Sox content every single day now that the Red Sox are back in full swing. And also make sure to follow myself on Twitter. It's at Jake Iggy, as well as my co-host Lauren. It's la. That's 3 laws. Lauren with 4 R's. And yeah, we greatly appreciate everybody tuning in to this episode. And as I mentioned, we got a lot of exciting topics to talk about. So definitely check out Locked On Red Sox for the remainder of the week, because we are back, baby, and baseball is back. So we're super excited to give you your daily Red Sox news. But everybody be well. Have a great rest of your day. And as I mentioned, lastly,